Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. Back for a third time this week as I share my thoughts and perspectives on all that's happening in the sports world, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And just to get some housekeeping notes in order before we begin, first off, I want to wish my sister-in-law a very happy birthday. I won't shout her age out, and I know she does not listen to the podcast, and that's perfectly fine because she is not a sports head in the least. But because it is June 13th, and I want to give her a birthday shout-out just in case, by any chance, she does happen to find out or catches wind through her significant other that I gave her a birthday shout-out. Much love, Madeline. Wishing you many, many more. Enjoy your day to the fullest. So I want to get that out of the way for starters. Also, yesterday I released an interview that I had with Kacy Standohar, ESPN, Fox Sports, sideline reporter. Very interesting conversation as we unpack a lot of different things, not only what's gone on in the world of sports, but also her unconventional journey in the business to get to where she's at today. And obviously she wants to go beyond. So you definitely want to listen to that. Apple, Spotify, as well as the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. So definitely peep that. Give it a like, subscribe, etc. One more time, I would sincerely appreciate it if you do so. Then on top of that, if you didn't see, Sunday I released my latest vlog, which happens to be my journey over the last almost 2.5 decades, being a part of the quote-unquote new media, as it's entitled, I Am New Media, or I should say titled, I Am New Media, talking about the old media compared to today, as well as the new media and some of the things that I see from afar, whether it's their integrity, whether it's a situation where they're, for whatever the reason, just trying to get clickbait material and not really going the route of one that's going to be credible and entertaining and engaging. It's all about trying to get all the looks and the likes and the C's and all that good stuff. So you definitely want to check that out on my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. So please do so when you can. And then lastly, I'm rocking the old Final Word t-shirt because on the 7th, now this is dating last week, was the anniversary, and I get it, this is old news, what have you, but for those who are watching on YouTube, I'm wearing the old Final Word JAYREELZ and JD t-shirt going back to my days of Blog Talk Radio, so I wanted to represent that today for those who are watching. So if you're wondering, what the hell's the final word? I thought I'm listening to the JAYREELZ podcast. No, I just thought I'd dust off this old relic and wear it here in front of the camera. So now that all that can be pushed away and aside, let's get right to it. To my Celtic Nation and fans that, whether they're here in the Bronx, and I'm sure I'm probably the only one representing, and beyond, we have one more step to take. And I make it sound like I'm a part of the team, and not to say that I'm the world's biggest Celtic fan by any stretch, that's not the case, but Lord knows I've watched this team going on 5 decades. And to think, one more step, especially with this group, in particular, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and knowing that they've made it to a zillion conference finals, and knowing that they made it to now their second NBA final. And here it is on the cusp of finally getting to that mountaintop. One win away, 48 minutes, starting tomorrow night around 8:30 Eastern, where they'll go up against the Dallas Mavericks, as we know. And all I could say is this: if you're Adam Silver, I'm sure the Sauvignon Blanc did not go down well last night. They were hoping that the big comeback in the second half, or in particular the fourth quarter by the Mavericks, would have procured them a victory. So there would have been a little bit of drama and some intrigue going into tomorrow night's game, where the Mavericks would have gotten back in the series, and Kyrie finally got his, where he did score 35 points, although on 28 shots, and had to be a one-man band down the stretch, which I'll get to. But I know the NBA, they have to be a little bit sick right now because their season could end in a sweep. We have not seen a sweep in an NBA Finals since the 2017-2018 season. That was the Warriors when they swept the Cavs there in the second Kevin Durant title during that span. And for Silver and company, I mean, what could you say? The Celtics, and I would think the basketball gods, probably thought that this was going to be their year, considering the 64-win regular season. as well as this run where they've won 15 games, lost 2, and now have won 10 in a row, 7 of those on the road, and one more time. One more game away from being an NBA champ. And it's way too early. I don't care how many people get in my ear to say, congratulations, JAYREELZ. Oh, you guys got it. We know the odds are stacked against the Mavericks. No team has come back from an 0-3 deficit. It's going to happen someday. Let's hope it doesn't happen now. And obviously, if it were to happen on this stage, it would be the biggest, probably upset in the history of sports, because obviously we've not seen that in the NBA as far as playoffs or finals is concerned. Now, one thing Kyrie does have is that he was part of that team in 2016 where they were down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors, and that was the 73-win Warrior team where they came all the way back to win. As we all know, Kyrie hitting that shot. So maybe he's going to try to sprinkle some magic dust in the locker room there come Friday afternoon to kind of tell the guys one game at a time, one possession at a time, etc. But you would think when it's all said and done, whether it be Friday night or even as late as Monday, when the series would shift back to Boston if necessary, it looks like the Celtics are not only destined, primed, hungry, but they're ready to take that next step and win this NBA title. So I don't care what people are going to tell me over the course of the next, whatever it is, 24, 30 some odd hours before the start of this game, depending on when you're listening to this. So I've been even keel. You've seen my social media. I haven't even posted anything about it. To me, until that clock reaches 0 and the Celtics have one more point over the Mavericks, then I'll celebrate. Right now, there is no time to celebrate, and I'm sure the team is feeling the same way. And last night, they took an early punch in the mouth from the Mavericks. They got off to a big start, 22-9. Kyrie finally making threes. He hit his first 3 of the series there during that run. Then the Celtics came storming back to where they cut it to 1 right before the end of the first quarter. And then tooth and nail there throughout the course of that second quarter to where the Celtics were down by 1 at the half. And then after trading several baskets over the first 4 minutes, the Celtics then took off. They separated themselves to where they had, I believe, what was that, a 20-5 run, which punctuated in back-to-back threes by Derek White and Jaylen Brown, or maybe I have it flip-flopped, to where they had an 88-70 lead, and then it was actually 91-70 as you got into the fourth quarter. And then the Mavericks decided to go on a run of their own to where it was 22-2, where all of a sudden the Celtics couldn't throw the ball into the ocean off the side of a boat. And then the Mavericks came storming back. A lot of contributions there by the Mavericks, even though a lot of that was predicated on Kyrie and even Luka to a certain extent. And then Luka, of course, gets that foul with about 4:12 to go, where it was definitely a blocking foul. He was not set. And I know he had some things to say toward the refs at the end of the game. A lot of frustration on his part. First time he's ever fouled out of a playoff game. And for Luka, I was going to save the Mavericks for afterwards as far as their chances, etc., and how they played in this game. But this is how I look at it with Luka. For him, and we know with him being a top 5 player and arguably a top 2, 3 player in the sport, he had a bad game. I don't care how you want to slice it, dice it, etc. He got off to a great start. We talked about that run, 22-9, and pretty much had that big first half, similar to what he did in game 2, where he scored 20 points in the first, seemed like the first 10 minutes of the game, or maybe, bleeding into the second quarter. But Luka was not Luka Doncic. When you look at his final numbers, not only was he 27 points on 27 shots, he was 1 for 7 from 3. I believe he had 7 rebounds, 7 assists. So it wasn't a vintage Doncic game by any standards. And yes, people could say it was still effective. He was still keeping his team in the game. And right, we could talk about that. But for a guy that, all right, he may not be the most efficient shooter as we know, but at the same time, 1 for 7 from 3, not making big shots, of course, in foul trouble to the point where he fouled out with 4 minutes and change left in the game. And that's when you knew that maybe it was going to be the beginning of the end, but still the Mavericks were right there nipping at the Celtics' heels until you got a couple of big buckets late. It was 93-92 when they came back from that long run where Jaylen Brown and then the big 3 by Derek White to make it 98-92 gave them a little bit of separation, but then, of course, they did cut it to 100-98. And then the Celtics, from that point on, Jaylen Brown, he's just been phenomenal. What more can you say about the guy? If the Celtics do win tomorrow night, he should be the MVP. And I get it. There may be some people out there that would think Drew Holiday, although he had a very sparse 9 points yesterday, but we've seen what he's done throughout the course of these first 3 games, in particular games 1 and 2 especially. And then Tatum, although he had 31 points yesterday, but did not shoot well. Was he 4 for 13 from 3? Yes, he did make some timely baskets. And yes, he did play a very efficient game, but did not shoot well. And to me, this has been Jaylen Brown's stage to be what will likely be an MVP when it's all said and done. But that's been the difference between the Celtics and Mavericks. They've been getting contributions from everywhere. Even a guy like Xavier Tillman, who came in and got a big 3 there in the third quarter. So for him, Sam Hauser was another one who had a couple of key 3s there in the first half. He was 3 for 3. That's all he got was the 9 points and ended up 3 for 4 in the game. But between that and also Derek White making big shots, as we've seen, that's what the Mavericks are unable to get on their end, because it just can't be all Kyrie and Luka throughout the course of a 48-minute period. Yes, you did get PJ Washington to get a few 3s. Okay, you got a big whoop 3 from Josh Green. Derrick Jones Jr., the guy's been invisible. You haven't seen him. Tim Hardaway, you might as well put him out the pasture. And you're going to need to get guys that, not to say they got to put up 20 points or 25 points, but you're going to have to get guys that are going to chip in 11, 13, 15 points. It just can't be all on the dynamic duo of the Maverick backcourt. And this is what happens where you have a team that plays very well defensively, that being the Celtics. And I get it that the Mavs could also play pretty good defense too. I mean, think about this. The Celtics have scored 108, 106 in the last 2 games. And you would think that if the Mavericks held the Celtics to below 110, you would have thought that they would have won one of those 2 games. But as it is, the Mavericks haven't been able to crack 100 in this series. 89 game 1, 99 last night, and 98 there in game 2, because it was 105-98, I believe, off the top of my head. So the Celtics, it's not as if they've put up 115, 120 points in these finals. So the Maverick defense has been pretty good, but it just hasn't been good enough, where the Celtic defense has shined throughout. And for everything that I've chronicled, they've won now 10 games in a row, 7 games on the road, and 1 more win away for a 16-2 NBA playoff run. Now, that hasn't been matched. I've tried to think back prior to the start of this recording. I know we can look back at that 2001 Laker team where they were 15-1, and remember, they had the best of 5 in the first round, so that's why they only have the 1 win less than we've seen here throughout the course of these playoff runs, dating back to, I believe, the early part of the 2000s, maybe mid-2000s, when they extended the first round from 5 to 7 games. And I'm not trying to make this Celtic team, and again, they haven't won anything. So I should just shut up right then and there. But how I look at this moving forward, I would think with Luka coming out, and who knows if he's going to be fined. I watched a little bit of his press conference, but you could tell he was frustrated. And he said, hey, they made the call. What are you going to do? It is what it is, etc. And I don't know if he delved into it a little bit further, but you would think whether it's Luka and even to a certain extent Jason Kidd, and I watched a bit of his press conference, but I don't think he put it on him, so you can let the players kind of exhale. But I would think that the Mavericks are going to get probably a generous whistle come Friday night or tomorrow night. And that's not to say that the Celtics are going to automatically lose, but I could see the Mavericks showing some face, at least for that home crowd, although it's going to be very daunting because, like I said, the Celtics, they're like sharks in the water right now and they smell blood. They want to put this thing away with the quickness. And think about this. In the previous series, when they were up 3-0 against Indiana, all the talk was that, hey, we were in this same position last year, down 0-3 to the Miami Heat, and we saw what happened. Don't let us get 1. They got 3, and yes, they fell short in Game 7, as we all know, in that conference final. So they're going to do whatever it takes to put that proverbial foot on the neck of the Mavericks to close it out. And yes, would it be nice as a Celtic fan if they were to lose game number 4 to then bring it back to Boston for a Game 5, for a party atmosphere, for a possible coronation? Win this game, win this series, and that's it. I don't want them to flirt with the idea of, all right, well, we're down by 20 and it's closing out the first half. Let's just take the rest of the half off. We'll fly back to Boston. And no. I don't want to hear any of that. I don't want to see any of that. Because, again, you do not want to give life to a team that is down 3 games. And if you give them the 1 game, all they want to do is think about getting back to Dallas at 3-2 and had the home court and the home fans behind them. I don't want any part of that as a fan. So that's what we have there. I'm not going to go any deeper, any further. Celtics have just been phenomenal. What more can you say? They've been a complete team throughout the course of this run. And one more time, they have one more step to take, as we all know. And of course, that was without Kristaps Porzingis. How can I forget? Porzingis, who had that weird injury with the leg there, as you saw at the end of game 2. And when it was announced, I didn't even know if it was a break. Was it a tear? Was it a rupture? And it happened to be a tendon that seems to be, I guess I don't want to say it's ruptured, but he said that he was going to do whatever it takes to get out there on the floor. And the Celtics certainly are proceeding with caution, and why not? They're up 2-0 in the series. Now they're up 3-0, and I would think Porzingis may be chomping at the bit even more to at least want to get into play a couple of minutes, because I'm sure he feels as if with his contribution in game 1, not as big as in game 2, but knowing that he has a chance to be on the floor in uniform, as you saw him there in street clothes last night, to be a part of that celebration, I'm sure he's going to want to coerce the coaching staff, maybe even the front office, to say, hey, listen, let me at least suit up, and if the game gets out of hand, let me get in there over the course of the last couple of minutes in garbage time, if it happens to go that way, just for him to get a little bit of a taste and be out there on the floor. And listen, I'm not trying to make Kristaps Porzingis out to be Bill Russell, but I get it. With him being this close and he's not gotten this deep in the postseason, and knowing, I'm sure, the competitive juices are flowing, that he wants to be out there with his team, then I don't know if that's going to be granted by the front office, coaching staff, etc., but we'll have to wait and see, especially with Porzingis, whether or not he's going to get in there. And yeah, it was just this tibial tendon, a dislocation, so who knows? And to me, that sounds serious enough. If it's dislocated, I don't think you could run up and down the court and cut and do things of that nature. So we'll wait and see what's going to happen there. That's what I have with the finals. You know, we'll talk about that on Monday, recap it. I know it'll be a couple of days after if the Celtics do win, and if not, we'll preview a game 5. So we'll see what goes on there. Then you had sad news yesterday morning come through where the logo, Jerry West, do I even need to get into all of his resume, whether by player or executive? Well, of course I'm going to do so, but I'll try not to go too deep in the weeds, but it has to be brought up. It has to be mentioned. Jerry West, who when I break down the top 10 players of all time, he's on that list. And I don't care what people say. I don't care if people are going to say, oh, you got to put Kobe in there. Oh, you got to put Shaq on there. Oh, you got to put Kevin Durant in the top 10. You got to put Steph Curry. Those are guys that, yes, on other people's lists would be in their top 10, not mine. Because when you look at the period of the 60s and when you look at how the NBA has unfolded, and I get it, a lot of people aren't going to look at it this way, especially if you're under 30. And this is even, when you think about it, a little bit of a disrespect to Bob Pettit and George Mikan, two guys who were pillars to start off the NBA there in the 50s, as well as Bob Cousy. But for a guy like Jerry West, who came in 1960 through West Virginia, made it to a national championship before losing to Cal, where he was a top pick for the Lakers there, 1960, when they moved from Minneapolis to the Southern California, to La La Land. And everything that he represented to come along with Elgin Baylor, who was drafted by the Minneapolis Lakers at the time, prior to West being a part of the team. And we know about all the heartache and the heartbreak as a player, losing to the Celtics in all these big finals, including 68-69, which was a final that they should have won. That was the Don Nelson 16 bounces. Of course, I'm exaggerating. The big shot there in Game 7 for the Celtics to win, which was Bill Russell's last game, and how he was just crying in pain, in tears. Another finals loss to the Celtics. A year later, losing to the Knicks, and we all know about Willis Reed. And then it wasn't until the 71-72 season where he finally was able to be an NBA champion, one of the top teams of all time, where they won 33 straight games. Wilt, Gail Goodrich, Jerry West, we know about that team. And for him to finally get to that mountaintop, obviously it was almost bittersweet because of all the other times of him falling short and him being the, I don't want to say the lovable loser, but a guy who was just class personified, a guy with a lot of elegance, dignified, respected, I mean, you name it. And of course, with him being that silhouette, being the logo, and I understand over the years, people think, oh, we should put the Jordan brand logo as far as it being the new logo of the NBA, or maybe even Kobe for that matter. And we've seen even LeBron with the way he soars for a dunk. But to me, it's Jerry West. I think about that logo as a boy, and for everything that he did as a player, and then was even, can't say better, but when you think about what he did as an executive, whether it's with the Showtime Lakers in the early 80s, even into the mid 80s, bringing guys like Michael Thompson on board and trying to reevaluate his team as the decade moved on. We know that the Lakers were the team of the 80s, Showtime Lakers, etc. And then how about him later on in the 96 draft, trading for Kobe Bryant as well as signing Shaq, which I get it, anybody could sign Shaq, especially if you're the Lakers. And with Shaq during that time period, him getting into movies and rap music, which was before that in his days in Orlando. But he was a guy that orchestrated one of the big trades there where Vlade Divac went to Charlotte for the rights to get Kobe Bryant. And that's a trade that I'm sure the Charlotte Hornets, odds back then, of course, they left, moved to New Orleans, and you had the Charlotte Bobcats before they're the Hornets today. But we've seen what he's done, whether he's even Golden State, those few years that he was able to be an executive overseeing what went on there with Bob Myers, and to have that team go through their run there in the mid-20 teens, even with Memphis there in the early part of the 2000s, them being a little bit respectable, bringing Hubie Brown in as coach. I mean, the guy has had one of the more decorated and literally stellar basketball lives that anybody has ever seen. Because generally a player of his caliber, Hall of Famer, top 10 player of all time, generational player when I'm talking about the 60s, even into the 70s, and for him to have that type of playing career as well as to be the executive, to have the eye for talent, to be able to draft certain players and construct his teams. And granted, I get it. It's LA, glitz and glam, etc. Magic, Kareem, Worthy, Shaq, Kobe. You go on down the list. But for him to have his fingerprints throughout the Laker organization, later on with the Warriors and what they've done, Memphis, even the Clippers for a short time, and then over the last few weeks, him becoming ill, not returning texts to close friends of his, and just seeing that that was maybe the beginning of the end for Mr. Jerry West, and sadly yesterday passes at the age of 86. Goes without saying, thoughts, prayers, condolences to the West family, to the Laker family, the NBA. We truly lost an icon, a legend of the sport. And this is what, a week and a half, or 2.5 weeks after Bill Walton leaving. And we know Walton on a much lesser scale from the standpoint because he had the injuries, but we know if he was healthy, he would have been definitely one of the all-time greats. But for West, and now it just makes you think with what's gone on recently. Also, Chet Walker, we talked about there on Monday. Again, may he rest in peace. The logo, Jerry West, dying at the age of 86. And then also have Danny Hurley, speaking of the Lakers, he turned down the Laker offer there on Monday. The deal, which was reported 6 years for $70 million. And the first thing I thought when I saw that was, wait a minute, 6 for 70? And I get it. He's going from college to the pros, his first ever pro job. But the Lakers, who wined, dined, flew him, his wife out, and you would have thought that they would have thrown a Godfather offer at him. And that's what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a thing where, all right, we got him in our facility. We got him at the restaurant. Lock the doors. There's no way he's leaving here without signing his name on the dotted line for him to be the next Laker coach. And 11 for 70. Now, listen, was he going to get a contract of $20 million to be the richest guy in the sport? That would have been a stretch if they would have given him, let's say, a 5-year, $100 million deal. Now, I'm sure there would have been a lot of coaches who have the pedigree and certainly have gotten their due, whether your name is Greg Popovich, whether your name is Eric Spoelstra, whether your name is even Steve Kerr, to be paid in the 14, 15, 16, and $17 million range. Even a guy like Monty Williams, where the Pistons signed him for, 5 years and like $78 million. So I get it. You're not going to pay Hurley maybe in that stratosphere, but you would have thought it would have started 15 for 75. And for him to be amongst the top coaches being paid in the sport. And I get it. He has not stepped foot on an NBA court to coach a basketball game. But you would have thought, again, with everything that was percolating leading up to Hurley flying out there a week ago today and thinking that, oh, geez, he's probably going to be the next coach. And even though Hurley's, we all know his roots, Jersey, East Coast, his wife, Rhode Island, obviously Storrs, Connecticut, back-to-back champions, they were not going to be seduced by the warm weather, the sunsets, the sand, surf, sun, and everything that SoCal provides. And even if it was a Godfather offer, I'm sure it would have been tough to pass up, but considering maybe that had something to do with it. But if you're Jeannie Buss and the powers that be that run the Lakers, you have to be embarrassed. Because this was a guy that I'm sure was right in your fingertips and you let him slip through. And listen, I'm not trying to make Danny Hurley out to be John Wooden, but if you're looking to make an imprint, if you're looking to make a splash, similar to what the Celtics did when they brought Brad Stevens on, and that was a shock, how Ainge was able to say, here, the keys to the castle. Now, he wasn't vice president of basketball ops, as we know, where he is now, and look at the job what he's done there. But you would have thought that maybe the Lakers would have pushed all their chips in the middle of the table and said, all right, here's our deal, Danny, take it or leave it. Instead, now, I get it, $11 million a year isn't anything to sneeze at, but I'm sure they probably would have thought and felt that, wait a minute, if Spoelstra's getting this much, and if Kerr's getting that much, and if Monty Williams is getting that much, and I'm coming off of 2 titles, granted in college are not pros, but can we start with 15? And maybe that was brought up, who knows? Obviously, I'm not privy to that, but now the Lakers have to go a secondary route. And now the report has it that they're going to interview J.J. Redick for the job. And I don't know if Redick is looking at that as sloppy seconds. I hate to use that term. But I'm sure Redick, maybe there's a sliver of that he could be thinking. But considering his connection with LeBron James, and I get it that that's going to be a determining factor on whether he's going to get the job or not. I don't know if the influence and the power of LeBron is going to be enough to persuade Jeannie Buss and Rob Pelinka, et cetera, to sign him and make sure that he's the next Laker coach. And I would think that Redick is going to look at that as a challenge to know that, hey, I'm cool with LeBron, which could also be a detriment too, because then maybe LeBron will want to overrule him at times. Oh, I want to draw this play instead. Who knows? But I think that that could be very dangerous for Redick to put his foot in those waters, knowing that, yes, he's going to have the title of head coach, but we all know the influence and the power of LeBron and what that can mean. And let's say if things start to get a bit sour or they become a little bit unsavory, then you know it's going to be LeBron, or I should say LeBron's way or the highway. And I get it. LeBron, he still has to see whether or not he's going to re-up on his deal. He has until the 29th, which he still has, 16 days in order for him to do so. But you have all that in the mix. So we'll keep an eye on that as we move it along when it comes to the Laker job. Now let me pivot and lace up my skates to go to the NHL. And I'm sure Gary Bettman is feeling the same way that Adam Silver felt last night, where the home team took care in the Florida Panthers of their ice, winning the first 2 games. And now as the scene shifts to Edmonton, where the Oilers and their high-powered offense, hoping that they could get on track, considering they only scored 1 goal in the first 2 games of the series. And for Edmonton, and we'll get into them a little bit in a second, but for Edmonton, as far as the scene shifting there, I know the Panthers had a bit of a hiccup as far as their travel goes. They did not leave on Tuesday, which is what the Edmonton Oilers did. They didn't fly out of Sunrise or out of Fort Lauderdale after the game on Monday night. They actually spent the night, wanted to get some rest, and then get out of Dodge back to Edmonton. So the Oilers, what they did was spend the whole day in Sunrise. They figured, let's get not only proper rest, but at the same time, let's get a practice in, leave on Wednesday so we could get to Edmonton somewhere around 1 p.m. their time. But with storms hitting the South Florida area, they weren't able to leave until about 3 hours after the fact and didn't arrive until Edmonton until sometime, I believe, early evening. I don't know if that's going to impact them in a big way. I get it, 2-hour time difference, and with the long travel from Fort Lauderdale to Edmonton, it's 2,500 miles, and I believe it's a 6-hour flight. So we'll see how that's going to impact them, but I would think you're only going to feel those effects in the first probably 5-10 minutes of the game, where Edmonton, they're going to have to jump on them quick, similar to what Dallas did to the Celtics last night. But of course, they're going to want to continue to apply that pressure and not sit on, let's say, a 2-0 lead to start. But in game 2, Edmonton draws first blood, and then the Panthers were able to get the next 4 goals. They got the second goal there to tie the game in the second period. And then you had Evan Rodriguez with the 2 goals, couple of power plays, one which broke the tie at 1, which was a goal that was short side, top shelf. That was a stop that Stuart Skinner, the goaltender, should have made. So did not come out and get an angle on that. And I get it was a quick shot there by Rodriguez. And then the third goal, which pretty much iced the game, where Rodriguez had a deflection there from the point to make it 3-1. And I know if you're watching on YouTube, my nose is itching. It's just nonstop, and I don't have allergies, so who knows what it is. But for Rodriguez to get that goal, which pretty much cemented the game, 3-1, they added on an empty netter there late. They also had a power play, Edmonton, where it was a little bit risky. It was less than 6 minutes to go. They had a 4-on-4, and then they had a power play where they figured, all right, we're down 3-1. We're going to have to at least tilt the ice to where we could have a 6-on-4, which they did. Now, they didn't score their empty netter during that time, but then they got salted the game away with the goal there to make it 4-1. And now Edmonton, to me, is do or die. Obviously, they're in a similar situation to the Mavericks. They have to win tonight. If not, they're not going to win this series. And therefore, Gary Bettman and company, I'm sure they will not be happy knowing that if the Panthers do win tonight, the series, for all intents and purposes, is going to be over. You're not going to have any length in this Stanley Cup Finals, similar to the NBA. And even though I didn't do a big overview, but both of the sports have really suffered here. And I get it. You've had some Game 7s in the NBA and even in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but this has not been the most thrilling or even for the most part, most memorable finals for both sports to date. And on top of that, maybe even throughout the course of the postseason. And I'll put that to rest when the time comes, but as an early aside, just to keep that receipt, that's what you have there here in this Cup Final. Do I think the Oilers are going to win tonight? I think the Panthers, similar to the Celtics, they have that hunger, they have that desire. They're going to do whatever it takes to win these games. And I think Edmonton, they're going to have to jump on them early. I think get off to a 3-0 lead, because to me, 2-0 is not going to be safe. We know that the Panthers have some firepower to get back into a game. And Edmonton, they're just going to have to be relentless. They're going to have to find lanes. They're going to have to create odd man rushes. They're going to have to obviously capitalize on any power play opportunities. And I would think with the extra day off and then flying back, maybe they'll be a little bit more rested. I know that's not going to be a factor as you get deeper into the game. But when you have a team that's on the ropes, and even with all the firepower that the Oilers have, they have to just be nonstop from the drop of the puck to when it's zeros, and hopefully they come out on top. And I'm hoping Edmonton wins. As you know, if you've listened, I'm rooting for them. I did not pick them to win. I picked the Panthers to win this series in 5. And right now it's looking that way. And let's see after tonight if that could be the case. Now, even if Edmonton does win, they could still win in 5. I get that. But if they go up 3-0, then who knows? It could probably be a sweep. Or if Edmonton does show some pride there Saturday night to win a game number 4, then you would think it's going to be all said and done Tuesday night when the series shifts, if it does, back to South Florida. So that's what you have with the NHL. I wish I had more to add, more to say when it comes to that, but I'm hoping that Edmonton makes it a series. They get back in it, unlike the NBA. So we have that to deal with. Now let me turn my attention to baseball, as we're now this close to pretty much being the only sport standing. And yes, even that much closer to another sports dead zone. Remember the first one after the Super Bowl? From that point to the start of the NCAA tournament or even the baseball season on March 28th, yes, we're slowly but surely approaching those deep waters where we're going to be out to sea wondering what our sports world is going to look like. And no, the Olympics aren't going to cut it. And no, the British Open may not. And even Wimbledon, I get it. But as far as the 4 majors, we're that much closer to just baseball truly being day in and day out the only sport that we're going to be on top of. And I hate to do this, but the Kansas City Royals going into the series in their building against the big bad New York Yankees, and the Yankees, as great of a start that they've had, and even though they had a little bit of a speed bump last weekend when they lost 2 out of 3 to the Dodgers, but maybe with Seth Lugo pitching the opening game of the series, who's been one of the top starters in the AL this year, and maybe that the Royals, could they hang with the Yankees? Could they be a little bit competitive? And I'm not trying to say that they had to win 2 of these first 3 games, which the 4th game will be today. But I would have thought that even if you would have had one win and been competitive in the other, and all right, maybe the other game got away, you could think to yourself, all right, well, at least the Royals have shown that they can play with the Yankees. And what we've seen over the first 3 days here, that is far from the case. They are certainly going to be a pretender when it's all said and done. And I get it. You can't look at a series in June and kind of take a 30,000-foot look at what the Royals have been and what they're going to be for the rest of the season. But when they stack up against stiff competition, and in this case, in their building against the Yankees, and you've seen what's happened, all right, Seth Lugo had a decent start, 7 innings. He gave up 4 runs, kept his team in the game, but they lost 4-2. And then they just got beaten to the back of the woodshed there on Tuesday night, where Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton hit long home runs into the night. And then last night, they led 8-0, and Giancarlo hit one to the Ozarks. And even though the Royals had a bit of a comeback there late, but they lost 11-5. So today, are they going to save face and show that they could salvage this series, or are they just going to get swept to the fountains there in the outfield and show that, yes, when it comes to the Yankees or even the Orioles, I don't know if they played. Yeah, they did play just recently. But are they going to be a team that we could really seriously consider in the wild card race? Because I don't know if they're going to win a division, considering the Guardians now have some length in the division. So for the Royals, I get it. They were a team that I picked as a surprise this year, and they've certainly done that. And yes, they could beat up on the dregs of the league. They could beat up on the Angels. They could beat up on some of these bad teams that we've seen here throughout the course. And you have to go through all of Major League Baseball. I don't know if they played the Rockies just yet or the Marlins and teams like that. But for Kansas City, I looked at this as, all right, let's see what they got here. Let's see if they can at least compete with the Yankees, and boy, they've come up very small here over the course of these first 3 games. And then you also have the Braves who have hit the skids here, and I don't know if it's a combination of what's gone on, especially with Ronald Acuna being out for the rest of the year with that ACL injury. Who knows? But the Braves have certainly fallen flat on their faces here as of late, and I get it. They lost the back 3 of that series to the Nationals, that 4-game set in the nation's capital, and then they lost the first 2 there in Baltimore, which they'll conclude their series today. And this series with the Orioles starts a stretch of, I believe, 12 games against the American League, because then they go home to play Tampa, Detroit, before coming to the stadium next weekend to play the Yankees. And who knows what they're going to look like then. Not to say that Tampa and Detroit are world beaters. They're pretty much bottom feeders in the AL East and the AL Central, respectively. But the Braves, who got off to a very good start, then the Phillies went going away, and then now they've hit the abutment here to the point where they haven't really pitched, they haven't even hit, and now they have lost 5 in a row, where the Nationals, who have crept up on them, now granted, I believe it's like 6 games and a loss, but they are closer to the Braves, and the Braves are to the Phillies in the division. So just keep that in mind. We'll navigate that, especially as we get deeper into next week before they come play the Yankees next weekend, which would have been, we would have thought, a banner series, maybe not along the likes of Dodgers-Yankees, but a series that we could have looked at and said, all right, this is a heavyweight matchup. And now the Braves got to wonder. I talked about this Memorial Day. To me, there were 5 teams that could win a World Series. And I think you could still put the Braves there. But boy, the hourglass through the hands of time are slipping through them, because yes, we could get to October and maybe they could fly under the radar, unlike the last 2 years when they won the division and they got spanked by the Phillies in the division series. But right now, the Braves, they are not looking good, and they haven't really hit this year, unlike last year when they were one of the top hitting teams of all time. And this is now without Acuna. So just keep that in mind as we move it along. And speaking of the Phillies, I know they're going to be without JT Realmuto, who had, I believe, meniscus surgery. So he's going to be out for quite some time. So you would think the Phillies will still be fine considering the cushion that they have in the division, but that's something to keep in mind as far as his progress when he comes back. I'm sure it's probably a 4 to 6 week deal, but they certainly don't have to rush him back, so that's a good thing. And then the Dodgers made a trade, and the trade deadline's not for another 6 weeks, but they brought on Kevin Biggio, Craig Biggio's son, Toronto Blue Jays. They traded him for a minor league reliever. So for Biggio, that gives them at least another infielder, because Gavin Lux has been awful this year, and I know he's coming back from a knee injury at ACL surgery last year, and he really has not been a guy that a lot of people thought prior to the injury as being one of the top prospects in the sport, a guy that you could just put at second base, pencil him in the lineup for the next 10 years, He's a guy that right now, his confidence is all over the place. He's batting, 210? I believe 207 last I checked. And who knows if Lux is going to be a guy that's going to even be able to fulfill that potential. And not to say Kevin Biggio he's a little bit older. I believe he's 29 years of age. But I guess for reinforcements, just for more depth, they bring in Biggio. Let's see what he does there in a Dodger uniform as they made that trade just a couple days ago. Now, as far as what else is happening in the sport, not much else is going on. I'll check the schedule here to see what we got cooking for the weekend. But when we talk about these divisions, Orioles, they continue to keep pace with the Yanks. 1 in the loss, that's the big number there, but they are 2.5 back. But again, we talked about the games in hand as we know. And right now, what do they have? 3 games in hand over the Yankees. Red Sox, who the Yankees will play this weekend. First time they'll go head-to-head this year. Blue Jays and Rays under 500. And that's another thing, too. We have so many teams in the sport that are under 500. And let's count them. I looked at that earlier. Or 500 or below, because the Red Sox are currently at 500. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. Oh, boy. Think about this. You have 19 teams that are 500 or below. That is a disgrace. And I don't know when the next negotiation is going to be when it comes to the owners and players, but you damn well know that is going to be Armageddon, because the players aren't going to budge and the owner's going to say, hey, listen, I got teams, or Rob Manfred, the commissioner who works for the owners, he's going to go to the head of Major League Baseball to say, wait a second, we currently have 19 teams that are 500 or below, and we know that MLB is top heavy to begin with. There has to be some give and take here. Now, if there's going to be a salary cap, there has to be a floor too. You just can't have teams have $50 million payrolls. Can't do that. So think about that. You have 30 teams in a sport, and you have 2/3 of them that are pretty much 500 or below. That's an absolute atrocity. And even though we could talk about some of those teams that are in the mix, out Cleveland, and all right, you want to throw in Kansas City just for the hell of it, because they're going to be at least playing for a wild card. Or who else can I throw in here? The Brewers, I know they're leading the division, but the Brewers, are you going to take them serious come October? Absolutely not. Arizona, they've fallen on bad times, considering maybe they have a playoff run and World Series hangover and they didn't even win. Baseball is a mess in that regard. So we could talk about these teams and separate. It's just brutal. And this is what we're going to have to watch pretty much from now until you get to the college football season on Labor Day. And hopefully that feels like 50 years from now, because the last thing I'm thinking about is football. That's right, I said it. But let's take a look at the schedule here. Schedule, you have, like I mentioned, Atlanta concluding their series against Baltimore. Same for Yanks and Royals. Philly and Boston will conclude their series. And I believe, what happened there yesterday? Boston won yesterday, so I believe they split the first 2 games as the Phillies won 4-1 there on Tuesday. But when we look at the weekend, that's what we really want to see. Cardinals, Cubs. I know that's probably going to be a Sunday night. No, Red Sox, Yankees will be the Sunday night ESPN game. But it's usually Cardinals, Cubs, because they look at that rivalry. Obviously, Yankees, Red Sox. Philadelphia, Baltimore. That's there you go. There's a series that I understand may not have the flair and the just billboard, or however you want to call it, 5-star matchup like Dodgers-Yankees last weekend, but Philly-Baltimore, that was my World Series prediction. So that is a series I'm definitely going to pay attention to over the course of this coming weekend. So that is a banner matchup, to say the least. Cleveland at Toronto, Padres at Mets, Tampa, Atlanta, we said. You got nothing cooking. Royals at Dodgers, Texas at Seattle. That's a big series for Texas. That's one we have to pay attention to, because Texas is 5 games back of the Seattle Mariners. And I don't know if that's a wraparound series. I got to take a look at that, meaning that they'll play tomorrow, but they're also going to play on Monday. Texas is 5 in a loss, but 6.5 back. So that's a big series for Texas to see if they could get 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4. Yeah, let's take a look to see what that series is going to look like. And Seattle's playing the White Sox today, who, the White Sox, talk about put them out of their misery. The Mariners have won the first 3 games, and they'll wrap up their 4-game series with them today. So we're looking at a sweep there of the White Sox. But No, that is a weekend series, and then Seattle actually goes to Cleveland after that. So that's one to keep in mind there over the course of this weekend and into early part of next week, Seattle. So let's see if Texas can get themselves a little bit closer. They have to win 2 out of 3 just to gain 1 game, so let's see how that unfolds. But other than that, in baseball, that's what you got, and we'll continue to monitor that, especially with those big series this weekend, Philly and Baltimore, that being the big one. And now let me break out the golf clubs, put on the gloves, or batting gloves, as I grip it and rip it, because the U.S. Open begins today, and you have to wonder, Scottie Scheffler, we talked about him on Monday, whether or not he's going to have his just brilliance going into this weekend, and that's in Pinehurst down in South Carolina. Scheffler, he won the Memorial over the weekend and has won 5 matches this year. 1 major, though, and that obviously being the Masters. We saw what he did at the PGA. We get it with the whole arrest there on the second day where he did shoot a 66, but then Saturday things started to go awry before closing out strong. And the one thing I could say about this course, unlike what we saw at the PGA, this course is going to be very tricky. It's flat, but you're going to see a lot of greens that you're going to have to navigate if you're the Scottie Schefflers, the Bryson DeChambeaus, the Rory McIlroys, etc., because there's going to be a lot of slopes. What I heard was that it's going to look like a spoon, where, yes, things may look like it's going well for the ball, but then all of a sudden it's going to take that dip and it's going to roll about 20, 30 feet. So you may not see the 20 unders that we saw there just a month ago at the PGA. You may see 4 or 5 unders when it's all said and done. And that, I think, is going to be good for the sport, because what we saw there at the PGA was just an absolute disgrace, pretty much bringing the golf course to its knees. And not to say you want it in reverse, because although that would be challenging to see golfers at the top of the leaderboard on Sunday just being 3, 4, or 5 under, I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but the likelihood of that happening than what we saw at the PGA, I'm sure we're going to see the former more so than the latter. But with the weather, it's going to be hot, and I don't think there's going to be rain throughout the course of the weekend, but it's going to be hot, it's going to be humid. I saw mid to upper 90s, or excuse me, low to mid 90s, with the heat index being in the upper 90s, and that's going to bode well for Tiger, which I'll talk about in a second. But Scheffler, he's on this great run. Let's see if he's going to capture another major. And for him, we all know, #1 golfer in the world, and we would also think that with Scheffler being part of the mix, and we know who those guys are, whether it's Xander Schauffele, who came off of winning that PGA, the Lee Westwoods and the Tommy Fleetwoods, who I like to say, because they always seem to be at the top of the leaderboard once you get to Saturday and maybe even to Sunday. So you're going to see those guys there. Maybe Rory McIlroy, him having a situation where he has reconciled with his wife, and I don't want to make excuses or be an apologist for him, but this is a guy that has a giant piano on his back when it comes to him not winning a major tournament in now 10 years. And here's a guy that we thought he already had 4 in his back pocket in 2014, and we thought he would have maybe close to double digits by now. But here it is, 10-year stretch, and he hasn't won a thing. Maybe a bit of the weight of the world off of his shoulders, maybe a scenario where he could kind of exhale and look to see whether or not he could be in the running or at the top of the leaderboard come Sunday. So we'll have to keep that in mind. We know about the Cameron Smiths of the world and guys like that who we would think Justin Thomas will be in the running or certainly be in competition come Sunday at the top of the leaderboard. And we all know going into Father's Day weekend, shout out to all the pops out there getting ready to celebrate their day come Sunday. But how I look at it, it's going to be, to me, all based on the weather and the golf course, because the weather, with it being flat, so you're not going to have a lot of hills, you're not going to have that to deal with, but the course, as I mentioned, how it's designed, that is certainly suitable for the golf course to bring these golfers to a point where they could get frustrated, the heat could be a factor, and even a guy like Tiger, let's talk about him for a second, where I think his best days are behind him. I know people are trying to think that maybe he can recapture some of that glory in the 2019 Masters to win one more major, and then maybe, not to say he has to go off into the sunset, but to see that Tiger magic hopefully on Sunday. And even though he said he feels good, he feels great, it's a flat course for him. He loves the heat. He doesn't have to warm up as much in a cooler setting or in a cold setting. Let's say if it is in early April or at the Masters, or if it's a scenario where he's going to play at the Open, a la the British Open, where you're going to have a lot of blustery winds and rain and 50 to low 60-degree days where it's not going to be as warm and certainly not humid. And for Tiger, I got to see it to believe it, whether or not he's going to have it in him for 4 rounds, 4 straight days, no matter if it's 100 degrees and he's playing on turf. I don't care. I don't know if Tiger, maybe he'll have a good round or 2, maybe he'll make the cut, but I don't expect to see him anywhere near the top of the leaderboard. It would really have to be a thing where he's going to have to play above and beyond, and everybody's going to have to come back to the pack in order for him to be within striking distance come Sunday. So that's what we have there, and there's no John Rahm either, so that's a big loss here for the tournament. And Rahm, as we all know, one of the top players, and although he's not had a good year, but Rahm, who had, I believe, a foot infection, so if you're wondering where he's going to be, you're not going to see him at all this weekend. I guess you'll see him there at the Open next month in the middle of July. But how I'm looking at this, yes, Scheffler, who's going to tee off if he hasn't done so already, with Rory and with Xander Schauffele. I think you're going to see Scheffler in the mix, no shock there. Maybe even Colin Morikawa. He's another guy that always seems to be close to the top there. What about Brooks Koepka? Another guy. I think it's going to be hotly contested, highly competitive. I wouldn't be surprised if you see those guys there, even the aforementioned Tommy Fleetwood, Lee Westwood. I'm sure there's another guy that's also in the mix that could kind of sneak up from us, as we've seen here in the last couple of years, especially a guy like Brian Harman or Wyndham Clark, who won the U.S. Open last year out in L.A. You may have a guy that's laying in the weeds that could just sneak up upon you there. So when it's all said and done, it's easy to pick Scottie Scheffler. It's easy maybe even to go Rory McIlroy because he's long overdue to win a major tournament. I don't know. Some reason I'm looking at Cameron Smith as a guy that could possibly win this thing. I know maybe the heat could be a factor too. Who knows? I also like Brooks Koepka to be at the top. It's kind of hard to pick golfers here because when you do that, you're really a bad round, and especially with this golf course, away from not seeing this person at all throughout the course of a weekend. That's not to say he's going to miss the cut, but if somebody shoots, let's say, a 72, and even though that may be 3 or 4 shots off the lead, if you have guys that are shooting 3 under, 4 under, but then they have to be almost impeccable the next round and maybe the following one in order for them to be within a stroke or 2 at the top. So it's kind of tough to gauge, kind of tough. I'm going to say Cameron Smith for now, only because he hasn't won in a couple of years. He's a guy that, as we all know, top golfer, and something tells me Scheffler, I think he's going to be in the mix too, but I'm not going to. To me, that is just going the easy route, saying, oh, I think Scottie Scheffler's going to win. If Rahm was there, I probably would have said maybe Rahm because he's due to have a big tournament, but he's not going to be there. And maybe even Brooks Koepka. I even like him to come out on top and maybe even be a guy to win the whole thing, but something tells me Cameron Smith in my gut. So you know I'll be on top of that as the U.S. Open is already teed off, and over the next 4 days, we will see how that shakes down. Other than that, people, I'm not going to get into some of these NFL news and notes with Aaron Rodgers not showing up to OTAs, and I get it. Mike Tomlin signed a 3-year deal, or extension, I should say, on his contract through 2027 as he was in a walk year of his contract. To me, I know this is the final week before they take a pause, and then they'll come back there the latter part of next month where we'll really get into what's happening there. Not that I'm going to get into it because, please, training camp is a snooze. I'm not going to get into exhibition. To me, it's wake me up. Week 1, I know we have the Thursday game where Kansas City will host Baltimore, and then the day after that in Sao Paulo, Green Bay at Philadelphia, and then you have week 1 there on Sunday. Wake me up when we get to that day. All right? And I don't even want to hear anything about football unless it's something huge that we have to unpack and discuss. But I don't want to hear anything about football. Think about it. Spring is officially here a week from today. Or excuse me, summer. Look at this. I'm still in spring. JAYREELZ, wake up. Summer is officially here a week from today. You think I want to know anything or get wrapped up in anything that has to do with the NFL right now? Absolutely not. And with that being said, Another episode in the books. Thank you so much, people, for stopping by, for carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review on all the available platforms. As you know, Apple, Spotify, the website, JAYREELZ.com. Also on YouTube at JAYREELZ, where this, of course, will be up for the visually inclined. If you have any, and subscribe there too, please. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you haven't done so, go to any of my social media accounts. If you have a question, comment, suggestion, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just the number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood, it's in the DNA. As you all know, full-time content creator, trying to make a name for myself in this business, trying to earn a living in this business. That's why I need your assistance. I need your contribution. I need your participation. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your foes, tell your frenemies, tell your significant others, people, your acquaintances, no matter who it may be, the sports fan in your life. And not only that, even if they just want to check out the channel. I know I have a lot of sports stuff there, but I do have some stuff that obviously people can relate to when it comes to life experience, etc. So please, people, because you know I'm going to continue to deliver nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.